An 85-year-old fraction of a cent travels 2,600 miles, ends up in a stream, and I find it. These are my stories from the Signal. I have found this token, like many of my other finds, in central Pennsylvania in a stream. It is a 1935 tax token from Washington State. Had I not found this, I wouldn't have even known that such a thing existed. On the one side, it reads, Tax Commission, State of Washington, Sales Tax Token. And on the other, Tax on Purchases 10 cents or less, CH 180 Laws, 1935. The CH 180 refers to Chapter 180, which is the Revenue Act of 1935, defining the sales tax on retail items. To know why tax tokens came to be, you have to go back in time. For an entire decade, starting in the late 1920s, the U.S. went through the Great Depression. Unemployment increased, which decreased income tax. States were extended beyond their capabilities to support the high level of unemployed, and thus for the first time turned to sales tax. In Washington State, in the 1930s, sales tax on retail items was 2%. If you bought something worth 10 cents, you owed 0.2 of a cent tax. Either you would be charged 1 cent tax, meaning you were overcharged by 0.8 of a cent, or the store would absorb the cost. Keep in mind, in the Depression era, these fractions of a cent meant a lot to both consumers and retailers. The solution put out by 12 states, including Washington State, was to issue a tax token which would represent a fraction of a cent. The various states used wood, paper, copper, and many other materials. This one example from Washington is aluminum. Most consumers considered these tokens a nuisance. The use of tiered sales tax brackets was used as a replacement, which meant neither consumers nor retailers had to deal with or lose fractions of a cent. Washington State abolished the use of these tokens in 1952. Why is this token over 2,600 miles and 70 years away from the place and time where it could have been used? And why in a stream? As is the case with many of my finds, I am once again missing some details. But perhaps the clues are in the history, and perhaps the clues from other things I have found can at least make some sense of this. These tokens were used from 1935 to 1952. From 1941 to 1945, the U.S. was engaged in World War II. Washington State was instrumental in providing airfields for training, hospitals, POW camps, manufacturing supplies, and essential in the distribution of troops. Fort Lawton in Seattle was the second largest port of embarkment for troops and supplies making their way to and from the Pacific Theater. It would at times station 20,000 troops, and more than 1 million had passed through before and after the war. For sure, any young man traveling outside their home states for the first time would take advantage of some R&R and venture out to see Seattle. Someone from Pennsylvania who had just fought in the Pacific, eager to get back home, but awaiting transport, would venture to parts of Seattle. Pike's Place Market was built in 1907 and is only 4 to 5 miles from Fort Lawton. Perhaps this token would exchange hands hundreds of times in the marketplace, as hundreds of thousands of visitors would pass through on a monthly basis. Perhaps with a soldier about to go home. Maybe this soldier would join the mobs of people celebrating VE Day in the streets of Seattle. They would stop at several bars and end up with these strange tax tokens. Not realizing they could be used for other purchases, they just remained in the uniform pocket. Then onto a plane, the soldier would return home with a pocket full of change and a tax token or two. So why in a stream? Well, remember my video of the lost and returned World War II bracelet. I have a first-hand account that those returning from war came back to Pennsylvania and would swim in these streams. They would fish and canoe, Maybe while fishing, a pocket knife would be needed, and upon pulling it out, the token came along with and dropped in the stream. I have found this World War II military button in the same stream but at a different location as the tax token, thus adding credibility to the fact that those returning from war ended up in streams. My belief is these boys would get called up to fight, were forced to become men, and upon returning home would revert back into boys, and would swim and fish in streams and do what boys would do and lose the buttons, the jewelry, and the items they acquired along the way. Maybe it was a good thing not to have these token reminders of time they spent fighting. Maybe they just needed to be boys in a stream.